We know that according to the Gospels, Jesus was very active during times of pandemics. According to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus goes into the pandemic and even sends the disciples into a pandemic in order to help the people receive the healing that God wanted them to have and to teach the people how that healing could occur. This commissioning to the disciples enables Jesus to help them practice what was going to be coming in Acts. So when we get to the book of Acts and chapter 1, all that Jesus had begun to do, Jesus is now going to do through the disciples, who are in the book of Acts called apostles. And thus we will, the word apostle means someone who is sent. And thus we will refer to them as apostles in this time. If you look at Acts chapter 1, when the apostles met together for 40 days with Jesus, they ask, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? This is after Jesus has been raised from the dead and spent 40 days with them that they ask this question. And it leads us into our first principle. Principle number 1 of re-engaging spirit-led worship is let God pick the when. And after you let God pick the when, you're going to habituate with hope. So when they are saying, Lord, are you right now at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They're asking if the kingdom is going to be resumed. And we could, as church leaders, ask the same question. Is now the time, Lord, that you're going to return people to worship, that you're going to restore church services, that you're going to fill in the blank? And Jesus's response is, it is not for you to know the times. We don't get to know the times or the dates. So let God pick the when for when this will happen. Instead, the apostles are invited not to a schedule, not to a set timeline, but they are invited to habituate with the hope that the Holy Spirit would come upon them, to live with that hope. They've been living for 40 days. 40 days is a symbol of purification, as Jesus helps to purify them of the resistance that they had when Jesus was dying. And then they have 10 days without Jesus in a time of organization. And they're waiting throughout this whole time for when God determines the when. We can see echoes of this in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, the Holy Spirit is mentioned. The very first verse mentions God creating the heavens and the earth. And the second verse says, and the earth was dark. It was formless. It was empty. And in the midst of this chaotic, formless scene, the Holy Spirit is moving over the waters. This particular image of the Holy Spirit moving over the waters means the Holy Spirit is active. The word for spirit indicates a movement of air, and the movement of air is active, and it's active for who knows how long. We don't know how long the Spirit is active over these waters. What we do know is that in the right time, the movement of air produces sound, and the voice of the Lord speaks light. Here, the apostles are in darkness as to what exactly is going to happen. And they're waiting For when the movement of that air produces sound, they have hope, and we can have hope in the midst of the darkness to wait for that moment. One of the mentions of challenges is discouragement. And that is, we can get and I think this helps with some of that discouragement, because if we have hope that God's going to move in God's timing, then we can take courage for when it is dark, for when those days are stretching and we're not sure when it's going to happen. The Spirit is promised, but we haven't yet received. Jesus promises that they will be witnesses in their local vicinity, their local city, statewide, nationally, and internationally, in the references to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. They know it's coming, and yet could be very discouraged if they focus on the fact that it hasn't yet arrived. But letting God pick the when and habituating with hope can move us into a posture where we are ready when the moment does come. If you would like to have episodes delivered to you as they are released, then you can subscribe to the channel or at djbiblecoaching.com.